Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and yes, that's right, folks. We're back. We're back with the Truth Attack. Okay, we are the Liberty Works Radio Network, and we do need the support of the members of the listening broadcast audience to keep the broadcast network operating. So, if you enjoy the shows, the information, the discussions, the revelations, the guests and the hosts on the other shows on the network, we sure would appreciate it if you could find your way over to the LibertyWorksRadioNetwork.com and get signed up as a monthly subscribing member. Help us spread the word of freedom and liberty across the nation. And if you want to get fully informed on my favorite subject on this particular Truth Attack Hour every Thursday at 6 o'clock, which of course is the maladministration of the federal personal income tax by the IRS, the DOJ, and the lower courts for the last 55 years, which has now been completely exposed by a recent Supreme Court decision. You want to find your way over to taxfreedom.com, start reading, get educated, learn where things went wrong and how to fix it, because the income tax that we have today is not a tax system at all. Tax, if you recall, funds the operation of the government, but none of the monies taken from your paycheck all year long, allegedly for income tax withholding, and none of the money that you send in on April 15th, allegedly to pay the tax that you calculate on the Form 1040, none of those funds end up in the Treasury of the United States. None of them end up there. How is that possible? Title 26, Section 7809 says every single penny collected for tax must be deposited into the United States Treasury on a daily basis. Now, regulations modify that cycle to weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or quarterly, and most employers send in their withheld taxes on a quarterly basis. And that, of course, means, well, in addition to requiring the withheld tax to be sent in, Section 7809 also requires that a certified receipt for the deposit of the tax be created, showing the name of the taxpayer, with your employer sending money in, that would be you, the person from whom the tax was collected. It shows the name and the account number, your Social Security number, and of course the amount of tax to be credited to the name under the account number. So after your employer sends in taxes on March 31st and June 30th and September and December 31st, all the tax is paid at the Treasury. By law, there has to be a receipt recording the deposit of the tax showing you paid the tax. 4 times, each time your employer sent in the withholding. By January 5th, if your employer's on top of his game, he's already sent in all of the withheld taxes for October, November, and December. And it's all recorded at the Treasury as having been paid by you under your Social Security number. This is all done before January 7th. There's a record of all this money that's been paid as tax, or at least they're supposed to be by law, because they certainly told you it was tax. They told you they had to collect it. They took it from you. The law says it has to be deposited. Your employer sent it in. He's not going to get in trouble. He doesn't want to try and keep it. He sends it in, but somehow it doesn't end up in the Treasury. How do we know it doesn't end up in the Treasury? Well, is there any record that you've paid tax on January 5th or January 10th or January 30th or February 28th or March 31st? Is there any record that you've paid tax before then? If there is, why do you have to file? Oh, that's right. The reason why you have to file is because no tax has been paid. How is that possible? There's no record of any tax having been paid by you after money was taken from your paycheck all year long. But the reason why you have to file is because no tax has been paid yet. Remember? And so you fill out the return, and you either send in a check to pay the balance owed, or you calculate a refund out. For the first 6 years of your life, from 18 to 24, you're probably getting a refund, and after that, you're probably writing a check. So we know that the money taken from your pay by your employer doesn't go to the Treasury because there's no record of you having paid any tax. If you don't file, they come and prosecute you for not paying. But how is it possible they didn't pay? Your employer took it, sent it in, and the law says you have to create a deposit. So you collected this tax on my pay, my employer sent it in, how come there's no record of it having been paid? The law says there has to be. And then when I calculate the return and send it in with a check, how can we trace what happens to that money? Is it even going to the Treasury? No, it's not going to the Treasury either. And we can actually trace that money. We have a hard time tracing what the employer's money does because we don't get to send it in, do we? The employer does, and he ain't going to show us his records. We just have to take his word for it that he sent it in. Believe me, he sent it in. He's not lying to you. We don't need his records. What we need are the records on the other side that show where it really went. Because there is nothing for what your employer sends in. But there is something for what you send in. And the record regarding what you send in clues us in to where the money your employer sends in is really going. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about the check that you wrote and attached to the 1040 and sent in on April 15th. They cash it and your bank can give it back to you. They don't, because they don't want you to see what's written on it. What is written on it? Where would anything be written on it besides what you wrote on it on the front? The date, the amount, and the Internal Revenue Service or United States Treasury. And then your name, right? Maybe a note, taxes in the year. So how does that help? Well, that's not the only thing that's written on it. That's the only thing that you wrote on it. But, if you really want to know what's going on in this world, you don't listen to what the government says or what it tells you to do. What do? If you really want to know what's going on, do you listen to the government or do you follow the money? Well, let me tell you, if you really want to know what's going on, you don't listen to your government. No, that's not how you find out what's going on. The way you find out what's going on is you follow the money. So how do you follow the money? With a check that you wrote. Well, because you wrote it and your bank cashed it, you can ask your bank for a copy of it. Now, they usually send back copies of all your checks every month as part of your statement. If you're still getting written statements, most people are doing it digitally. You might get a digital image. But for some reason, they don't send you back a copy of the IRS check you wrote. Those get emitted somehow. So what you got to do to find out what's really going on is follow the money. You ask the bank for a copy of the cashed check that you sent to the IRS. Both sides, please, front and back. Because what they wrote on the back is what gives away the lie, exposes the fraud, and lets you see what's really going on with your life's work and pay and money. Are you being represented by a government that's being funded with tax? Or is there something else going on that you've been lied to about your entire life? It doesn't matter if you're age 24 or 90. You've been lied about it for your entire life. So, we follow the money. We get the canceled check back from the bank. We turn it over and we look what's written on the back. If what you had taken from your pay or what you sent in with your Form 1040 was tax, it will say on the back of the check, deposit to the U.S. Treasury. Because all taxes have to be deposited in the U.S. Treasury. Tax is money for the government to operate, for the government to spend. Nobody else is allowed to spend taxes. That's why your employer has to send it in. He's not allowed to keep it. He's made liable for the payment of what he's collected. Because tax is money for the government to spend, nobody else. That's why the law requires it be deposited in the Treasury immediately on a daily basis, so nobody else can take advantage of the use of the money. So, what does it say on the back of the check that you wrote for tax? Does it say deposit to the U.S. Treasury? How much you want to bet? That's not what it says. How much you want to bet? There's not a single person listening to this show that can produce a check that does say that, other than people that paid alcohol, tobacco, and firearms taxes or a corporate tax. What does it say? What it says is not deposit to the U.S. Treasury. What it says is pay to any FRB. F period, R period, B period. Pay to any FRB. Federal Reserve Bank. A private corporation. Why is your tax check being cashed by a private corporation instead of being deposited into the United States Treasury as required by law? Is that why there's no record of any tax being paid as a result of the withholding from your pay all year long? Because all that money went to the Federal Reserve Bank as well, not the U.S. Treasury as required by law? Why? How can this be? Well, there's no tax imposed on your labor. You think there is. You asked your employer to withhold it, but the government knows it's not tax. And because it's not tax, they don't have to deposit it in the Treasury. They can do whatever they want with it. And what they're doing with it is redirecting it to the private corporation, the Federal Reserve Bank, to collateralize the $39 trillion in debt they unconstitutionally ran up based on using your labor, your life, and your property, mortgaged properties, as the collateral for their reckless spending, bribing of the poor to buy votes, to keep power and run the nation into bankruptcy somewhere around what? 80, 90 trillion, 100 trillion, how much could it bear, right? Well, none of the money taken from your paycheck all year long goes to the Treasury. It doesn't fund the Treasury. It goes to the Federal Reserve Bank. Now, why does that happen? Well, that happens because if there were some kind of emergency, like an earthquake or a hurricane, Congress would run right down to the Treasury and draw on the funds accumulating there from the accumulated deposits from all the withholding all year long. If that money was sent to the Treasury, it would be in the Treasury, and Congress could go grab it and write a check to help the people devastated by the hurricane or the flood or the earthquake. But the money's not there. It never was sent to the Treasury. It's not in the Treasury. It's not tax. It's debt service. It's peonage debt service. So Congress can't run to the Treasury and draw on the accumulated funds of tax submissions all year. They have to go to the Federal Reserve Bank and borrow more money. 40 trillion, 45 trillion. Okay, I think I hear the first commercial break coming up. We'll pick this up in 5 when we get back. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour. Tell a friend, tell your family, tell your neighbors, get informed. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and let's just get right back into this. When that commercial break came up, I was explaining how we don't have a tax system in this country. The federal personal income tax does not represent, nor does it behave or act as or result in the collection of any tax. All of the money collected from the paychecks of the American people and sent in on April 15th, it's not tax. There is no tax imposed on your labor under the Constitution. There is no tax that reaches your rent, your interest, your dividends, your wages, your salaries, your alimony, your remunerations, your compensation, or any other source of revenue or earnings or income derived from the exercise of your right to work and your rights to own, have, and accumulate private property inside the territory of the states, outside the territorial jurisdiction of the federal government to write law, and outside of the legislative jurisdiction of the federal government to tax by impost foreigners, foreign persons, foreign imports, and in foreign places, by duty exported goods, and by excise commodities, licenses, and corporations. There is no authority to tax your labor, activities, or transactions conducted in the 50 states by right with private property in the states without federal involvement or privilege. It's the privilege of a license that makes income taxable. It's the privilege of the corporation that makes it taxable. And those funds, collected monies, paid monies, are deposited in the Treasury. But everything collected from the citizens, everything sent in on a Form 1040, none of this is tax. And the government knows it, which is why they're free to redirect all the checks and all the withheld funds to the Federal Reserve Bank, so that throughout the year, the Federal Reserve Bank has evidence that the American people are still working to collateralize the $40 trillion owed to the bankers without putting in a penny. Not 1 cent was put up by the bankers. They kited the first check. Not 1 cent. And yet the country owes them some $40 trillion. And it's gone from 3 trillion to 40 trillion just in the last 30 years. It was 3 trillion in 88 when Reagan left office. 200 years, 3 trillion. 40 years, 40 trillion. It's not sustainable. They're running it out. That's what inflation is made of. And of course, they printed money like crazy during COVID, which is how you got from 18 to 39 in 9 years. But as long as the bankers, the Federal Reserve Bank, sees the American people being willing to work and labor and get no benefit other than to service the debt for the government and the bankers, well, they'll continue to keep the interest rate so high that Main Street has no access to capital, even while Wall Street booms, which is where we're at right now, aren't we? For the last 5 years, Main Street has not had access to capital. The interest rates were too high and they weren't deemed creditworthy because the economy was too weak. Trump's taking over and restoring the drill baby drill program brought the price of oil down to less than $2, and that restarted a lot of economic activity that was leading us along very nicely up until the point in time where Trump decided to take advantage of the leverage provided by $2 oil and by taking the Venezuelan oil, which I'm pretty sure he did before Iran because Iran was dependent upon that. The Venezuelan oil coming to the U.S. allows them to take out Iran without the world's markets being disrupted, because the loss of Iranian oil can be picked up by the increase in U.S. production. So ships come to the Gulf of America to buy oil instead of through the Straits of Hormuz and to Iran. So the economy's going okay, but 40 trillion in debt. We need lower interest rates. Powell at the Fed has been screwing the American people for 6 years. Thank God he's not going to be chairman, but now he says he's going to stick around and take one of the seats, which will be anti-Trump. So the Federal Reserve Bank is actively working to influence and control and run your economy to the detriment of the American people and to the benefit of the bank. It's literally a peonage debt service system that enslaves the American people, co-ops the proceeds and fruits of labor to service the one world government agenda supported by the bank. The UN, the World Economic Forum, the WHO, the World Health Organization. The elites, the money, the national banks are building a global system. And America is paying for it. None of it is tax that's taken from you. None of it is tax that you send in. It's all peonage debt service, collateralizing the debt. We don't have a tax system. We have an 11th century peonage plantation system where the people and their labors are owned, just like George Carlin said, are owned by your rulers, who give you the illusion of some freedom by giving you meaningless choices. But they've reduced the system of free enterprise that is supposed to exist under the Constitution. You've got one party that's reduced it to a quasi-false capitalism. I've said before, we don't have a system of capitalism in this country. It's in the name, capitalism. It's supposed to be a free competition for goods and services and capital. A free competition for capital. What does that mean? Different interest rates from different lending institutions, banks, depending upon the level of risk present in the proposed enterprise and the history of success of the men proposing the venture. But without competing interest rates, you don't have capitalism. You have a monopoly. You have a monopoly on currency and credit. And when you have a monopoly on currency and credit, guess what's going to happen? Every single thing that the monopoly wants to own or control, they will by focusing the power of their monopoly, currency and credit, in the arena that they want to control, take over, or own. That's why there are only 6 food companies since the Depression. That's the first thing they bought up, were the thousands of individual farms to create the 6 major food conglomerates that now control the food supply in the U.S. and soon the planet. That's what a monopoly in currency and credit allows. You can bankrupt out all the littles and buy up the assets that they have to foreclose on. So you get 1 million farms, cheap, dirt cheap. So I guess we're getting a little off topic here, but the Federal Reserve's monopoly on money goes to a penetration and disruption of anything they choose to focus the money on. And they shouldn't have that power. Nothing but gold and silver coin shall be a legal tender in payment of debt. It's a power prohibited to the states and not granted to the federal government. So how do you end up with a legal tender of Federal Reserve notes? Why are they Federal Reserve notes? Why aren't they United States dollars? They're not United States dollars because we sold the notes to the Federal Reserve Bank. say there's a bank and the manager runs off with all the money. And the employees come in and find out all the money's gone and the customers are showing up. What happens? Well, the bank calls the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve says, we got you covered. It makes a call. It buys $10,100 bills from the Federal Bureau of Printing and Engraving for $400. 4 cents a note. $10,100 bills are bought by the Federal Reserve Bank from the government. 4 cents a note. They put $400 into the treasury and they get $1 million in cash back, which they then run over to the bank and it passes it out to the depositors so nobody realizes the system's a fraud. Now, not only do they do that, but when the government needs money, they buy the $100 million for 4 cents a note. And then they lend it back to the government. But not at the $40,000 it cost them to acquire it, at the $100 million full face value. Your government borrows the money back. Look, 41 trillion. And the bankers bought the money. That's why it says it's a Federal Reserve note on it. They own it. It was printed by the government, but it was sold as property to the bank for 4 cents a note, whether it's a $1, a $5, a 10, a 20, a 50, or 100, or a $1,000 note, which still exists, but they don't print it anymore. 4 cents a note, 4 cents a note. That's what the bank buys currency from the Bureau of Printing and Engraving, the federal government. Can you buy $100 bills for 4 cents a note? What happened to equal access? What happened to equal rights? What happened to equal opportunity? Oh, that was all thrown in the garbage pail in 1913 when they created the Federal Reserve Bank, gave it a monopoly on currency and credit, and made you all slaves or peons to work to cover the bankers' debt for the rest of your lives while they rule the world, and you get a depression, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Panama, Iraq again, Afghanistan. That's what the bankers got planned for you. Endless debt. Endless debt. It's an unconstitutional system of fraud. We don't have a capitalist system, and it was supposed to be a free enterprise system based on capitalism, a free competition for money, for currency. But that all got eliminated with the granting of the monopoly. There is no more competition. There are no differing interest rates. And as a result, the common man is locked out of access to capital, which is given almost exclusively over to the elite, the aristocrats, the oligarchs, the monarchs that run the country, the government, and the businesses. They're given unlimited access to the capital because it doesn't matter how much you spend, the population's going to pay it back. And what they don't want is all that money in the hands of the people, driving up inflation with too much currency chasing too few goods. So they steal it from you, despite the fact that they print it out of thin air whenever they need it. They don't need taxes to run the government. None of the money goes to the government to fund its operation. That's all borrowed. All the money goes to the Federal Reserve Bank to collateralize the $40 trillion in debt. It's not a tax system. It's a peonage debt service system, right out of the 11th century plantation peonage system. That's what they've brought back with the Federal Reserve Bank, not a monetary system. It's a slave system. Wake up, people, wake up. Okay, this is Thomas Fried on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and let's just get right back into this. So, all of this that I'm relating today jibes, of course, perfectly with the consequences of the Supreme Court's Moore decision a year and a half ago, where they held income taxes are indirect taxes and are not direct taxes under the 16th Amendment, which are unavoidable and imposed on whatever they want, earnings. But the Supreme Court also said in Moore that all direct taxes must be apportioned to the states for payment. That means you can't be asked to pay a direct tax under the Constitution, which is exactly what they've been forcing you to do since the end of World War II. Pay a direct tax on your earning that isn't constitutionally authorized and that doesn't exist, and that the government knows isn't authorized and doesn't exist. Because if they thought it was a tax, all of the collections would be deposited in the U.S. Treasury instead of being illegally and criminally routed around it to the Federal Reserve Bank, a private corporation. And when all the money funds a private corporation, not the U.S. Treasury, that's not a tax system. That's a criminal fraud being perpetrated by the government and the Federal Reserve Bank on the American people. It's the highest order of treason, which is what the system amounts to, doesn't it? Absolute treason. Because what they're enforcing is not constitutional taxation under a limited government in a republic of written laws. They're enforcing judicial legislation where it's every single bit of it has been made up by the judges. They made up a direct tax under the 16th Amendment. They made up a direct tax with no limitation. They made up the tax reaches you and everything you do in the states, even though we have no jurisdiction, territorial or legislative, in the 50 states. And labor, according to Title 15, Section 17, is not, the labor of a human being is not a commodity or article of commerce subject to excise taxation. And your labor in the states certainly isn't subject to taxation by impost, the taxation of foreign activity, which is exactly how the original income tax was implemented under tariff legislation, the Underwood-Simmons Tariff Act of October 3rd, 1913. A tariff is one form of an impost, which is the indirect power granted under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, the power to tax foreign persons in America, foreign imports, and all persons in foreign places, like the territories or possessions, or in a foreign country under a tax treaty. And that's exactly what the 1939 law shows us was done in 1913, 26 years before. It shows all the tax applying to foreign persons. And that's where Section 61 comes from, is a Canadian tax treaty that expired 30 years ago. None of the sources of earnings listed in Section 61 that you earn in the state are subject to tax. The government has no authority over rent, interest, dividends. Where would they get authority over that? There's no license involved. There's no federal privilege. Same with your wages and salaries and compensation. None of it is taxable to the federal government by Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. It's only taxable if they lie to you and have the judges make up a direct unlimited tax under the 16th Amendment, which, of course, the judges aren't authorized to enforce in the courts of America because they can't take subject matter jurisdiction, because subject matter jurisdiction requires that the court show that Congress was constitutionally authorized to write the law that's been brought to the court to enforce. And anything under the 16th Amendment can't be shown to have constitutional authority to write law associated with it because there's no enabling enforcement clause in the amendment. That's where Congress gets the authority to write law to enforce the impost, the duty, and the excise, and the apportioned direct tax, apportioned proportionately to the last census, to each state to be paid. That all comes from the original necessary and proper enabling enforcement clause of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, which gives Congress the power to write law to enforce all the powers granted by the original Constitution. And each amendment where a new power was intended to be created that Congress would have the authority to enforce against the American people as a result of the amendment, every single one of those amendments has its own enabling enforcement clause. The 13th, the 14th, the 15th. Oh, there's none in the 16th. But then the 19th, the 20th, the 23rd, the 24th, the 25th. They have enabling enforcement clauses. The absence of an enabling enforcement clause means no court in the country can establish the subject matter jurisdiction to enforce any tax under alleged authority of the 16th Amendment. It cannot be done under constitutional law. The IRS's, DOJ's, lower courts' enforcement of the federal income tax since 1955 is a complete and total constitutional fraud that constitutes the socialism of the Communist Manifesto, specifically the second plank, a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. That's where you find graduated taxation. Divide the people and let them fight amongst themselves over the different laws that apply to the different classes created by the laws that apply different authorities to the different classes. And this creates a system not of unified representation, but one of intentionally imposed class warfare to empower the government by having both sides, both classes, all classes, constantly calling out to the government to step up, assume more power, and end the violence and conflict and warfare of the class warfare system the laws created. It's a perpetual cycle. Doesn't matter if it's left in power or right in power, they're always assuming more authority to end the class warfare created by the fact that the poor pay nothing and the wealthy are being robbed under an unconstitutional system of graduated communist taxation, not constitutional taxation by uniform law that applies to and impacts every person who participates in the taxable activity or transaction. It all applies to them equally. Whether you're poor or you're wealthy, you buy a bottle of alcohol, you pay the tax. The poor don't pay more. The wealthy don't pay more. Nobody pays less. Everybody pays the same rate of tax on the product. It has to be uniform or it's unconstitutional. To have one class of citizens that pays 0, one class of citizens that pays 10%, one class of citizens that pays 15%, one class of citizens that pays 25%, one class of citizens that pays 30%. This is all unconstitutional. Tax brackets only apply to the corporate person and the foreign person, who can be taxed based on the amount of return realized by the enjoyment of the privilege possessed, the privilege of incorporation, to act as a corporation and walk away from debts, the privilege of being a foreign person allowed into America to earn money, the privilege of a license to sell alcohol, tobacco, or firearms. It's the privilege that is the subject of the tax, not the exercise of any right. And the graduated taxation ensures you end up with the communist division of the people, fighting one another instead of being unified in a system of representation. In fact, the graduated tax makes sure that you will never have unified representation because it is impossible, virtually impossible, for any politician to represent the whole of the American people. They have to pick one class or the other, one side or the other. And if you don't pick one class or the other, You get left out in the dark. You're not allowed to represent the whole people. Your party will abandon you and won't support you at campaign time. So the class warfare created by the brackets of the income tax makes sure that the politicians will rule you for the rest of your existence under the system. You haven't noticed they're the only ones getting rich as a class? You haven't noticed that. And it's the politicians that are getting rich as a class, leeching off the productivity of the productive classes, which are being drained to buy votes from the sloth and unproductive and addicted and unstable and insane or antisocial or intentionally dependent to undermine economic viability, which appears to be what the immigrants are into. 10 years are still on welfare. No job, still on 10 years. No assimilation. Oh, just keep funding it because the Democrats have to buy votes from illegal foreigners because citizens are leaving the high-tax liberal states. They should be losing congressional seats. They should be losing electoral college votes. And they are, a little bit. New York, Illinois, California, I lost a seat or two or three. But they should be losing dozens of seats based on the citizens leaving. The reason why they're not is they're replacing the citizens who have done an exodus. They're replacing them with illegal aliens that are being rolled up and rolled to vote in state elections. And of course, since they're voting in the state election and the state conducts the federal, they're voting in the federal elections too. And they're being counted in the census, which means representation in Congress is being given to foreigners in preference to citizens, because the liberal Democrats are corrupting the census by taking their power and representation from foreign invaders and pariah and the welfare leeches. And the Democrats are committed to waging and keeping this class warfare system being waged, because it's the power base that they now have to take, since their policy ideas either don't exist or are so entirely insane no person with a brain would support them. So they have to import a lot of dumb people with no brains who will vote based on handouts and shelter and prioritized care for the foreigners delivered by the Democrats. You give a crap about the blacks or the Hispanics that they've historically represented, but not anymore. They're not the ones being given the money or the shelter or the food or the housing or the prioritized medical or education. No. They're being removed from the homes to give them over to the foreigners. How much treason will the Democrats accept before they realize they've been thrown under the bus and to the wolves? And once again, sold down the river without a paddle. How much longer will it take before the minority populations realize they're being betrayed? They're being betrayed. And of course, we're all being betrayed, aren't we? So it's not just the minority populations. It's everyone who never took the time to learn about the Federal Reserve Bank and the income tax, isn't it? Yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. Okay, this is Thomas Fried on the Liberty Works Radio Network. I'll be back next week with more on more.